welcome. Tonight, we invite you to set aside the noise of modern life, the glow of screens, the rush of schedules, and the press of decisions, and instead drift gently into the past. Imagine, if you will, a place where the scent of wood smoke lingers in every corner, where the walls are darkened by soot and flickering candlelight casts long shadows over stone floors. A place alive with the quiet labour of hands, kneading, chopping, stoking, stirring. A place where food meant far more than flavour, it meant class, duty, survival, and ceremony. This is not the dining hall, this is the kitchen. In tonight's slow, soothing journey through history, we'll step behind the grand feasts and banquet halls of medieval Europe and enter the world of the cook. Not the celebrity chefs of today, but the uncelebrated workers, men, women, and children who toiled in sweltering spaces to feed kings, monks, soldiers, and peasants alike. From the roaring hearths of castle kitchens to the humble pie stalls of a Paris back alley, we will follow the path of food in all its forms. And while some parts of this journey may remind us how far the world has come, others might surprise you with their quiet familiarity. Each segment will slowly reveal a different facet of this world: the exhaustion and rhythm of daily labour, the pressure of preparing noble feasts, the dangers of being a cook accused of foul play, the rich symbolism behind spices, and even what remains today in the ruins of old kitchens. But we begin, as always, at ground level, with the unending routine of those who spent their waking hours, often from childhood to old age, inside the smoky, chaotic heart of every great hall, the kitchen. Now, take a breath. Let your thoughts soften, and imagine yourself in a time where fire was both tool and threat, where every meal required hours of work, and where a cook's life was measured not in fame or fortune, but in blisters, patience, and steam. Let us begin. Imagine yourself waking not to the chime of an alarm, but to the rising scent of yesterday's smoke still lingering in your hair. The stones beneath your straw mattress are cold, but there is no time to linger. The day begins before the sun dares show its face. You are a cook's apprentice in the kitchen of a minor noble's manor, perhaps in the English countryside, or nestled within the forests of Burgundy. You are not yet a master, but you are past your first months of trial. You are trusted now to touch the bread dough, to stir the pots, and, sometimes, to carve the root vegetables, always with eyes watching. The kitchen itself is not one room, but many. A sprawling, open set of chambers just beyond the great hall. It is dark, even during the day. Stone walls trap the heat, and high windows allow little light. The smoke curls up toward the rafters, sometimes slipping back down when the wind disagrees with the chimney. The hearth, the great open fire, is always lit. Its warmth is not a comfort, but a presence. You must keep your distance or burn, yet you must stay close enough to boil water, roast hares, or turn the spit when meat is on the menu. The fire does not wait for your complaints. It flickers and cracks with a rhythm that you learn to hear like a drumbeat, dictating the pace of your labour. There are knives, many knives, kept not in drawers but on hooks or tucked into aprons. Each blade is tied to a task. You are warned not to mix them. There is the broad chopper for joints of beef, the long blade for fish, and the curved one for herbs. They are sharpened on rough stones and dulled again by bone and haste. Voices echo constantly in the kitchen, not conversation, but instruction. Yelling, yes, but not angry. The master cook shouts because the fire roars and the pots bubble, and because precision matters. Overcooked beans are wasteful, undercooked game is dangerous. A spoiled dish is not merely failure, it is offence, perhaps even insult, especially if it is destined for the Lord's table. You move quickly, yet with care. You learn the corners of the space where the water buckets are refilled, where the bread rises slowly in warm cloth, where the cats linger for scraps. You learn to navigate puddles, ash, and careless elbows. Some days, you are tasked with little more than turning a millstone, grinding flour with aching arms. Other days, you are sent to pluck chickens, an endless task of feathers and silence. If it is butchering day, the stench will cling to your hands no matter how many times you scrub them in cold water. Food is not constant. It follows the rhythm of the season, of fasting days, of what arrives from the manor lands. You cook with what you are given, sometimes a bounty, sometimes barely enough. There are no ice boxes, only cellars and hope. No timers, only experience. Yet amid the routine, there is pride. The master cook is respected among staff, even among nobles. They know the subtle flavors, the needs of digestion, the appearance of abundance. They hold keys to the pantry. They control the salt. And you, in time, might rise. But today, your task is simpler. You are stirring the pottage, slowly, so it does not burn. Your hands are red from heat. Your hair smells of leeks and smoke. And the rhythm of the kitchen, with its quiet panic and purposeful noise, carries you through the day like a lullaby made of labor. Outside, the world is green and distant. In here, there is only steam, flame, and work. And tomorrow, you will rise again before the sun. The kitchen is always busy, but there are days when its heartbeat quickens, when the ordinary rhythm of stews and loaves gives way to a more frantic pulse. A noble feast is coming. Perhaps a visiting baron is expected, or it is a holy day, or the Lord's eldest son is being married. Whatever the occasion, word has spread like fire across the estate. A feast for 100 mouths will be laid out in the great hall by sundown. To prepare such a spectacle is not a matter of a few hours. It is a performance, and it begins days in advance. Imagine yourself again, not as a master cook, but one of many hands in service. The kitchen is now a stage, each worker a performer. Every task has its place, and time cannot be wasted. The first challenge is space. Castle kitchens, though expansive, were not built for comfort. There is no modern notion of workflow. Instead, every corner is occupied. Doughs are rising in the pantry. Meats are marinating in barrels. Tables creak under the weight of ingredients, honeycombs, sacks of flour, bunches of herbs, baskets of apples, slabs of butter, and dried fish soaked overnight. The fires are stoked to life earlier than usual. 3 hearths are lit today, instead of 1. Spits must be turned by hand. The heavy iron cauldrons bubble with stocks and sauces, thickening slowly over a patient flame. The cooks murmur, chant, sometimes hum, not for pleasure, but for pace. Animals arrive from the estate's butchers and from nearby villages. Whole pigs, gutted and cleaned. Chickens, ducks, perhaps a goose if one was caught. There may even be a peacock, carefully plucked, roasted, and redressed in its own feathers for display not eaten, but admired. Preparation is a sensory storm. The meat must be rubbed with spices, garlic, and vinegar. Large mixing bowls are filled with eggs and cream, whisked with handheld bundles of twigs. Pastry is rolled and shaped into intricate pie crusts, some filled with minced meat and raisins, others with sweet custards or dates, if they can be afforded. Each dish is designed not only to nourish, but to impress. Food at a feast is a message. It speaks of the Lord's wealth, his power, and his hospitality. Even the order in which dishes are presented follows a coded ritual: first the roasts, then fish, then the subtly spiced stews, then fruits and sweets. Cheese and nuts often come last, paired with warmed wine. As the hour approaches, the final steps begin. Platters are polished, garnishes plucked fresh from the garden, leaves of parsley, sprigs of rosemary, whole roasted onions glistening with honey glaze. Ale is poured into jugs. Wines, mulled with cinnamon and clove, are strained through linen. Then comes the moment of transport. Everything hot and delicate must be carried swiftly to the great hall. There are no serving carts, just feet and hands, moving with purpose. If something drops, it is not replaced. Waste is frowned upon. A kitchen boy who fumbles might be sent away, or worse, back to the stables. Once the food arrives at the hall, the kitchen fades into obscurity. The guests see the results, but not the labour. The Lord smiles, raises a toast, compliments the flavour of the goose. Back in the kitchen you are cleaning. The floor is sticky with spilled broth. The knives are dulled, the embers are dying. Your apron is stained, your arms aching, your back sore. And yet there is quiet satisfaction. The feast was delivered. The dishes returned mostly empty. The noble was pleased. Tomorrow you return to lentils and barley, to onion soup and brown bread. But for tonight, you and your fellow cooks sit on the stone step behind the scullery door, sipping the last of the warm cider and picking at the remnants of a forgotten tart. No one sees you, but you were the reason the feast succeeded, and as the torches flicker in the distance, you listen to the soft laughter from the great hall drifting over the courtyard wall. You do not join them, but their joy was made possible by your hands. In the kitchens of medieval Europe, glory came not in speeches or titles, but in silence, in effort, and in the steady rhythm of well-timed work. In a medieval kitchen, the cook wielded more than just ladles and knives. They held, quite literally, the power of life and death, not by choice, but by proximity. In an age where food was prepared from scratch, and where every meal passed through many ungloved hands, the question of trust hovered over every steaming dish, every salted roast, every spiced tart placed before a lord or lady. Imagine yourself now as the senior cook in a noble household, perhaps in the 15th century, somewhere in the Low Countries. You've been with the family for years. You know the master's tastes his fondness for saffron in broth, his dislike of garlic in pies. His wife prefers fish. His son detests soft cheeses. You remember the wedding feast, the arrival of new servants, the seasonal shifts in the pantry. And yet, on this otherwise uneventful afternoon, something is wrong. A meat pie, served warm to the master's table, has brought more than satisfaction. Within the hour, he is ill, not merely discomforted, but pale, sweating, doubled over in pain. His guests murmur. His wife calls for a priest. In the silence that follows, attention turns slowly, inexorably to the kitchen. You know the pie was baked with your own hands, or perhaps by one of your apprentices. The ingredients were gathered from the usual sources. The pastry was sealed, the game meat tender, the broth well seasoned. There were no bitter smells, no strange textures. But poison is not always something you can see. In medieval Europe, the fear of food poisoning extended beyond spoiled meat. It included deliberate malice. Kings had food tasters. Nobles paid well for loyal cooks. Courts employed apothecaries to detect toxins or to administer them, depending on the customer. There were dozens of known poisons, many derived from herbs, roots, or even minerals. Monkshood, hemlock, belladonna, arsenic. Even spoiled grain, when mouldy, could mimic the effects of poison, though no one yet understood the fungal culprit. When a noble fell ill, suspicion followed familiar paths. Was it the wine, the cupbearer, the maid who brought the bread? But again and again, eyes returned to the kitchen where hands were many and motives were unknowable. To be accused of poisoning was not always the result of evidence. Sometimes it followed rumour. Sometimes it was politics. A cook could become a scapegoat in a noble family's power struggle, or a pawn in a dispute between rival houses. And with no clear understanding of bacterial contamination, even a spoiled egg could lead to whispered talk of treachery. Interrogations were rarely gentle. A cook might be imprisoned, questioned at length, and if found guilty, executed. Records from certain Italian city-states tell of cooks boiled alive in oil or burned for crimes of poisoning. It was as much about spectacle as it was about punishment. But proving guilt was another matter. Many cooks, when questioned, pleaded ignorance. They had followed the recipe. They had done their duty. They had tasted the broth themselves, served the same meal to others, eaten from the same plate. In some households, elaborate systems were devised to prevent tampering. Dishes were sealed with wax. Food was brought to the table in locked containers. Servants were assigned to watch the preparation of every ingredient. Tasting before serving became a ritual of both pride and protection, and so a cook lived under constant scrutiny. They might rise to quiet prominence, trusted, even favoured, but never truly safe. You, the cook in this imagined tale, survive the accusation. The noble recovers his illness, it seems, was a result of sour wine, not meat. The suspicion lingers, but your hands are spared. You return to work, though not without glances from the steward, not without whispers from the scullery maids, not without doubt. Still, you chop the onions, you grind the spices, you knead the dough, because in your world, to stop cooking is to disappear. And in kitchens throughout medieval Europe, stories like yours unfolded quietly, behind closed doors where the scent of rosemary mingled with fear, and where the humblest of workers stood closest to power. In the eyes of a medieval noble, a banquet was not merely a meal, it was a stage, and food lavishly displayed, meticulously prepared, was the script, the set, and the spectacle all at once. Imagine yourself now not as the cook, nor the server, but as a quiet observer near the wall of the great hall. You are unnoticed. You do not speak, but your eyes follow everything. The air is heavy with warmth, the scent of roasting meats mingling with beeswax and woolen garments. Torches hiss softly against the stone walls, their light dancing across tapestries. Long wooden tables stretch the length of the hall, set not with individual plates as one might expect today, but with shared trenchers, thick slabs of stale bread used as both plate and sponge. At the head of the room on a raised dais sits the lord and lady of the manor. Their table is separate, both physically and symbolically. Upon it rest the finest offerings, silver drinking vessels, pewter platters, and the most elaborately decorated dishes the kitchen could produce. To dine here is to display one's wealth, alliances, and social standing. Guests are seated by rank. Where one sits, what one is served, and even when one's plate is cleared, all speak volumes. And so, the food must not only satisfy, it must astound. The first course arrives, not quietly, but with ceremony. A line of servants steps forward, each bearing a dish. There may be whole roast swans, their feathers replaced and wings posed in lifelike splendour. A piglet, its mouth stuffed with apples, its skin browned to a crisp sheen. Bowls of pottage, thick stews with bits of meat and barley. Loaves of black bread, hunks of hard cheese, and pies that spill steam as their crusts are broken. And then the spices, the spices, a pinch of saffron here, a dusting of cinnamon there. Pepper, imported from the far reaches of the world, used as both flavour and signal. To serve spiced dishes was to announce your access to trade, to declare your influence across borders. Each course is part of a choreographed dance. Music may play a lute, a harp, a soft chant from the gallery above. Between servings, jugglers, or poets may perform. A falconer may enter, showing off his bird. A fool may jest, though never at the expense of the highest lords. The second course brings fish trout poached in wine, or eels wrapped in herbs. Perhaps candied fruits, carefully preserved in honey. There may be meat pies filled with veal and figs, or pastries shaped like castles, hiding soft cheeses within. A delicate custard may follow, topped with a single sugared almond. The dishes are many, yet not everyone eats all. Guests pick and choose. Some nibble, others gorge. Waste is common. What remains will be sent to the servants, or to the poor, or fed to the hounds. Drink flows freely, ale for most, wine for the favoured. The Lord's cupbearer never leaves his side, pouring with a measured hand, always alert. For even in celebration, there is risk. Conversation hums through the hall, diplomacy cloaked in laughter, alliances sealed with toasts, insults softened with bread. And always, in the background, the kitchen waits. The cooks do not rest. As one course is served, the next is prepared. Cold dishes must remain cool, hot dishes piping. Timing is delicate. A mistake is noticed. A delay is felt. By the time the final course arrives, a display of marzipan animals or a gelatinous mold of almond milk set in a silver basin the kitchen is already cleaning. The hearth is cooling. The scullery fills with platters to be scrubbed, spoons to be sorted, cloths to be rinsed and wrung. Back in the great hall, the guests recline, hands greasy, lips sweet. The Lord rises, offers thanks, praises the feast. The message has been delivered. This house is prosperous, generous, and powerful. As the music fades and the guests depart, the servants sweep away crumbs. The long tables are bare once more. The hall echoes. And somewhere in the kitchens, a cook's hands tremble with exhaustion and satisfaction, because a banquet, like a play, ends when the last line is spoken, but its success lives in memory, in reputation. In the hush that follows, only the stone remembers the applause. Leave the great hall behind now. Step away from the long tables, the gilded cups, and the roasted delicacies arranged in peacock feathers. Let the echo of noble laughter fade into the distance. Now, imagine yourself in a different corner of the medieval world. A village, a modest one, nestled near a forest, its cottages built of wattle and daub, roofs thatched in straw, floors packed with earth. You are no noble, no kitchen servant. You are simply one of many an ordinary person, born to a life of quiet labour. And you are hungry. The daily meal for a medieval peasant is not a banquet. It is not even a recipe in the sense we understand today. It is a matter of using what is on hand, what has not spoiled, what can stretch across days of toil. Bread is the constant, not the pale, soft loaves of the wealthy, but coarse, dark, and heavy with bran. The flour is mixed from whatever grain is cheapest or most available: rye, barley, even oats. Wheat, though ideal, is often too expensive. The bread is dense, filling, and slightly sour from the long ferment. It is made not every day, but in batches, several loaves at once, baked in the communal village oven. The oven is a shared resource, tended carefully, as firewood is precious. Timing your turn is important. Miss your slot, and you go without bread for days. Alongside the bread, there is pottage, a stew of whatever is available: turnips, leeks, and cabbage. Perhaps lentils, if last year's crop was good. Carrots, though smaller and paler than the modern kind. On rare occasions, a bit of bacon or bone might be added, though meat is scarce and reserved for feast days. The pottage bubbles slowly over the fire, thickening as the days pass, reheated again and again. This meal is eaten twice a day, maybe once. In the morning before work, and at dusk when the light begins to fade. It is served in a single bowl, shared among family. Each person has a spoon, often wooden, carved by hand. You dip in, eat in silence, and pass it on. Sometimes there are extras. If the chickens have laid, there may be eggs. If someone has bartered well at the village market, there may be a bit of cheese. A forager might bring mushrooms from the forest, or berries in summer. A small sour apple, a scrap of dried fish. But more often than not, it is just the bread. And the soup. Drink is simple thin ale, known as small beer, brewed weekly and consumed instead of water, which is not always safe. It has little alcohol, just enough to kill off illness. Children drink it too. The meals are eaten near the hearth. There are no tables, perhaps a bench or a low stool. The fire gives off warmth, but also smoke. The ceiling darkens over time. The air smells of ash, damp wool, and cabbage. There are no spices. Salt is used sparingly, it is expensive, and must be conserved. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, these are words heard only in stories or whispered when news from the castle travels down the road. Hunger is not constant, but it is familiar. In winter, food is stored in root cellars, dried or salted. But stores dwindle, and by early spring, known as the hunger gap, there is often little left. The turnip becomes the meal. The bread becomes thinner. Children eat slower. Yet in this simplicity there is rhythm. The meal is not about pleasure. It is about continuity. The act of breaking bread, of stirring the same pot each day, of passing bowls hand to hand, it binds the family, the village. Sometimes on holidays, food takes on colour. Cakes are made with honey and dried fruit. A roast goose might be shared among neighbours, but these days are rare. And so, you return to the black bread and turnip soup. It fills the stomach. It sustains the body for another day in the fields, another night beneath the thatched roof. In the medieval world, survival is quiet, flavour is secondary, and the meal, humble though it may be, is enough. As the fire dims and the bowl is emptied, the children settle to sleep. The spoons are wiped clean with a cloth. The loaf is wrapped in linen, and tomorrow it begins again. There is a certain romance to the idea of medieval spice, images of golden saffron, fragrant cinnamon, or dark flecks of clove carried across deserts on camelback, nestled in the folds of silk. But for the cook, and for the nobleman's table, spice was not merely a question of taste. It was a symbol, a signal, a story told in aroma and coin. Let us wander now, not into the kitchens or the fields, but into the storeroom of a well-off manor perhaps in Flanders or northern Italy. A locked chest stands in the corner, heavy and bound in iron. Only the lord or the steward carries the key. Inside is no treasure of gold or jewels, but something far more ephemeral. Little pouches of dried goods, carefully wrapped in waxed cloth or tucked into jars sealed with wax. Peppercorns, saffron threads, cinnamon sticks, ginger root, dried and dusty, cloves like tiny black nails, nutmeg, still whole, with its strange glossy sheen. Each is stored with care, weighed on small scales, recorded in ledgers written by a practiced hand. The journey of these spices to this quiet storeroom is long and uncertain. Most originate far beyond Europe in the forests of Sri Lanka, the islands of the Moluccas, the markets of Damascus, the ports of Alexandria. They move in caravans and aboard ships, changing hands dozens of times. Each merchant adds a margin. Each border crossing demands a toll. By the time they reach a noble household, their cost is astounding. A handful of pepper might be worth a week's wages for a labourer. A pouch of saffron, the dried stigma of thousands of crocus flowers, could buy a sheep. Why, then, did medieval lords covet them? Part of the answer lies in preservation. Some believed that spices masked the flavour of aging meat, or aided in digestion, or warmed the body in cold months. But these practical uses were eclipsed by a more powerful allure, prestige. To serve spiced food was to announce that one could afford what others could not. A dish flavoured with cinnamon or nutmeg was not merely flavourful, it was proof of reach, of wealth, of participation in a global web of trade that few understood but many envied. The cook, then, became not just a labourer but a curator of these rare gifts. Recipes were adapted around what was available. A simple pear tart might be elevated with a touch of ginger, a roast duck glazed with honey and a hint of clove, a stew of veal, dark with pepper and saffron, golden in colour, exotic in aroma. Saffron in particular was prized. Its delicate threads imparted not only flavour, but colour, a golden hue that turned even humble grains into something regal. Harvested by hand, each stigma plucked at dawn, Saffron was so valuable that adulteration became common. Some sold dried marigold petals soaked in dye. Others stretched their wares with thread. Punishments for fraud were severe. Pepper, too, was more than seasoning. It became a form of currency used to pay rent, taxes, or bribes. Known as black gold, its little wrinkled globes sat in pouches that jingled as richly as coin. And then there were cloves, cinnamon, and ginger. Less common, more mysterious. Each came wrapped in stories of eastern markets, of shipwrecks and salt air, of distant lands where spices grew on trees and were guarded by serpents, as medieval imagination sometimes claimed. In many kitchens, spices were measured with reverence. A cook might be given a small amount in a morning handoff, recorded and sealed, expected to return unused portions. Misusing spices, adding too much, or losing them was a punishable offence. They were as much a part of the Lord's treasury as silver goblets or bolts of silk. For the poor, spices were stories, scents wafting from the manor, flavours tasted only on rare holy days, if at all. A peasant might live their whole life without once tasting cinnamon, might hear of saffron only in sermons or tales, might know the smell of clove from incense alone. And yet, for all their glamour, spices did not guarantee good food. A poorly cooked goose with pepper was still dry, a burned tart still bitter, no matter how much nutmeg was sprinkled on top. But they offered a way to speak through food, to impress, to flatter, to dominate a table without saying a word. So when a nobleman invited guests, when a cook opened the spice chest and measured out the golden strands, it was not just seasoning, it was performance. A bowl of black bread and onion might feed the body. A dish rich with saffron and pepper fed ambition. Let us leave the manor kitchens behind now, the stone walls, the servants, the locked spice chests, and step into the bustling streets of 14th century Paris. The year might be 1365. The Seine moves slowly through the heart of the city. Its bridges are crowded, not just with foot traffic, but with stalls, shops, and homes built directly over the water. You are here not as a noble or a servant, but as a traveller, perhaps a journeyman mason, a clerk running errands, or a washerwoman with a few small coins in her pocket. The church bells mark midday, and your stomach reminds you that it is time to eat. There is no kitchen waiting for you, no pantry to raid. But Paris, even in the 13th and 14th centuries, is alive with food not inside homes, but on the streets. The scent of roasted meat rises through the chill of early spring. A cart nearby has been turned into a mobile grill, where a vendor turns skewers of salted pork over coals. You recognize the hiss of fat, the faint sweetness of the smoke. For a single denier, he will sell you a small piece wrapped in a scrap of linen. No cutlery, no plate, just your hands and appetite. Elsewhere, near the old market of Les Halles, women known as rôtisseuses sell hot pies round, thick and filled with spiced meat. The crust is sturdy, designed to hold its shape as you walk. Some pies are filled with veal and leeks, others with rabbit, if it is a good week, or with dried fruit and almond paste, if the cook has connections. Along the Rue Saint-Denis, a baker pushes a cart stacked with flutes, small, narrow loaves of fresh bread, still warm from the communal oven. For a few extra coins, he'll offer a smear of soft cheese or a wedge of boiled egg tucked inside. By the docks, fishwives sell grilled herring on bits of bread. Not always fresh, not always warm, but salted enough to last the journey from the coast. You chew slowly, letting the salt linger on your tongue, and in the shadow of Notre Dame, vendors offer thin cakes fried in lard golden, crisp, and sprinkled with herbs. Children gather around them, hands outstretched, waiting for scraps. The food is humble, but it is quick, cheap, and hot. For the working poor, street food is not a novelty, it is survival. Most homes lack proper kitchens. Chimneys are rare, firewood expensive. To cook indoors is to risk smoke, fire, and illness. And so, many people live without ever boiling a pot of stew. They eat what they can afford when they can find it, from the hands of strangers in alleys and corners. The vendors are mostly women. Some are licensed, others work quietly, dodging watchmen and city officials. Their carts are simple wooden planks on wheels, sometimes little more than a basket set on a low wall. Their clothing smells of oil and onions. Their fingers are burned from lifting pans. The city tries to regulate them. Inspectors walk the streets, checking the freshness of meat, the cleanliness of bread. Punishments for spoiled food range from fines to public humiliation, vendors forced to parade through town with spoiled goods hung around their necks. Still, the street food thrives. It feeds the clerks, the masons, the nuns, the scholars from the university. It nourishes on the go, between prayers and chores, between dawn and dusk. Coins change hands quickly, a half-eaten tart for a copper penny, a cup of warm wine, mulled with herbs and just enough spice to cover the bitterness. Even a thick porridge, ladled into a traveller's own wooden bowl, steaming with barley and bits of vegetable. Some vendors specialize. One might serve only fried chickpeas, another sells nuts roasted in honey, a third, a widow with a faded apron, offers nothing but boiled turnips dusted with salt and wrapped in paper. In summer, the smells are intense: fish, garlic, vinegar. In winter, the warmth of the food becomes part of the draw. People huddle near the carts, not just to eat but to feel the heat. You move from stall to stall, your appetite modest, your purse not much heavier, a bit of bread, a tart, a warm cup. You eat with your hands, wipe them on your sleeve, and keep walking. There are no menus, no written prices, no guarantees. But for 1 coin, 2 perhaps, you have been fed. The ache in your stomach has quieted. The city continues to move around you, horses clattering, children laughing, a distant chant from a passing procession. And you, like thousands of others, carry the scent of roasted meat and fried dough with you into the rest of your day. In the warm comfort of a modern kitchen, safety often goes unnoticed. The oven beeps, the stovetop glows softly, the faucet provides clean water. A fire extinguisher sits quietly in the corner, and walls are lined with tiles, easy to wipe clean. But step back now, into the kitchens of medieval Europe. These are not rooms built for ease or security. They are dark, enclosed spaces. The stone walls sweat in winter, crackle with heat in summer. The roof, if it exists, is often black with soot. The very air is a mixture of steam, smoke, and ash. And the greatest hazard? The fire. Imagine yourself working here. It is just after dawn. The great hearth has already been lit. Its embers never truly go out, but every morning they must be revived, coaxed back to life with bellows and patience. The flames are open, uncontrolled, and central to every task. To cook, you must lean near them. To boil water, you must suspend an iron pot over their licking tongues. To roast meat, you must turn a spit slowly and steadily, often for hours, with the heat chafing your face and burning your hands. There are no thermostats, no dials, no timers. Heat is gauged by eye and instinct. A cook learns to know when the fire is ready, not too hot to burn, not too cold to delay. It is a skill passed down, learned by mistake. Bread scorched on one side, a stew that never quite thickens. Around the fire, the tools of the trade are few but heavy, crude, and often dangerous. You might hold a long-handled ladle, its metal bowl darkened by years of use. You might use iron tongs, thick and awkward, to move logs or retrieve a pan. Pots are not light. They are cauldrons of cast metal, their handles heated through. You learn to wrap your hand in cloth, or not to flinch. Knives are everywhere, not the slim, balanced blades of today, but simple iron tools, often hand-forged and sharpened on stone. There is no set for slicing, paring, carving. Just one or two trusted blades, used for everything. Their edges dull quickly, and sharpening is constant. There are no cutting boards. You work on wooden blocks, table edges, or even directly on the floor. Hygiene is not fully understood. A knife used on raw meat might be used moments later to cut herbs. Illness sometimes follows, but few draw the connection. Smoke is constant. It curls from the hearth and fills the rafters. It irritates the eyes, seeps into the lungs, and settles in clothing and hair. In many kitchens, the only ventilation is a small chimney hole or a half-open door. Cooks cough quietly. They squint. They grow accustomed to it. Oil fires are a real danger. A dropped pan of lard, a knocked-over lamp, a carelessly placed cloth, any could spark disaster. In towns and cities, fire spreads quickly, leaping from kitchen to roof to home. Entire streets might burn before the flames are contained. And yet, there is no firefighting service. Only buckets, passed from hand to hand. Only shouts in the night. Burns are common. A moment's distraction might mean a blistered palm, or worse. There are no salves, no cold water taps, just cool cloths and time. Children work in these kitchens, 2 apprentices from the age of 7 or 8. Their tasks are minor: fetching water, grinding grain, plucking feathers. But they learn quickly the rhythm of danger. They are warned, sometimes cuffed, sometimes burned. Lessons are hard. Even the floor is perilous. Water spills, oil leaks. The stone underfoot becomes slick, especially near the washing area. Wooden clogs help, but not much. You walk carefully. You fall sometimes. Despite it all, the kitchen functions. Meals are made, bread is baked, roasts are turned. The chaos has an order, the danger, a rhythm. Cooks grow strong not just in arm and back, but in intuition. They know how to angle a pot so it boils faster, how to shift a log for more heat, how to judge the thickness of a soup by the sound of its bubbling. These tools, simple, heavy, imperfect, become extensions of the body. The fire, unpredictable and alive, becomes a companion. Feared, yes, but trusted, essential. There is no safety label, no warning sign, only experience and scars. But in the dim glow of the hearth, with steam rising and knives scraping, the cook moves with practiced grace. And the meal, born of hazard and heat, is served once again. In the medieval world, food fed the body, but drink, in many ways, sustained the community. Not wine, which was costly and imported for the upper classes, but ale. Cloudy, mild, often warm, and brewed in every village, town, and street. And though it may surprise you, the hands that stirred the brew were most often those of women. Let us step now into the quiet backyard of a modest home, perhaps in a village near York, or a lane in the outskirts of Cologne. It is early morning, dew clings to the grass, and the faintest hint of smoke curls from a clay chimney. A wooden barrel sits in the corner. A copper kettle hangs over a low fire. The woman tending it wipes her hands on a linen apron, carefully watching the slow rise of the steam. She is an alewife. Not a professional brewer, not a merchant. She brews for her household, yes, but also for sale to neighbours, travellers, and labourers. In towns where wells are foul and milk spoils fast, ale is the safest drink available. It is made fresh, consumed quickly, and weak enough to drink by the jug. The brewing process is ancient. First, barley is soaked and germinated, then dried into malt. The malt is ground and mashed in hot water to draw out the sugars. The result is a thick, sweet liquid known as wort. It is then boiled, sometimes with herbs, sometimes not, and finally cooled and fermented. There is no thermometer, no yeast packet, no steel vat. The process relies on intuition, on trial and error passed from mother to daughter. The alewife tastes, stirs, adjusts. She knows when the wort is ready by its smell, by the thickness on the spoon, by the look in the light of morning. Fermentation happens in open tubs. Wild yeasts find their way in. A good batch froths gently. A bad one grows sour and sharp. Some women guard their barrels with cloths soaked in nettles or herbs to ward off spoilage. Others simply hope. Once brewed, the ale is kept in small casks. It is sold quickly, usually within a day or two, lest it turn. There is no storage, no aging. It is meant for today's thirst. The alewife hangs a sign, a broom over the door, or a garland of ivy. This is the medieval signal that drink is available. A passerby might stop for a cup. A farmer might fill his jug. A mason, weary from work, might drink in the yard, trading gossip with others. The alewife earns coin this way. Not much, but enough to patch a roof or buy meat. It is women's work, but not confined to the home. It places her in the heart of local life. She knows who is hungry, who is kind, who stirs trouble. She listens, watches, remembers. In towns, alewives sometimes form loose guilds or are licensed by local councils. They pay small fees, agree to regulations. Inspectors, usually male, might arrive to taste the brew, to measure its strength. Fines are levied for weak ale, or for short measures, or for serving beyond curfew. The reputation of the alewife is complex. She is necessary, but not always respected. Some view her as greedy or unclean. In certain religious texts, she is portrayed as a tempter, a corrupter, a symbol of excess. Her independence, economic and social, is both admired and feared. In art and literature, she sometimes becomes a caricature, a plump woman with a foaming jug, loud of voice, red of cheek. But the real alewife is quieter, tired, focused. Her days begin early and end late. Brewing is not glamorous. It is hot, smoky, and unpredictable. And yet, it is power. Through ale, she earns. Through ale, she connects. Through ale, she makes her presence felt in a world where few women could own land or speak in councils. When the ale runs out, the broom is taken down, the barrel is scrubbed, the mash is fed to pigs, the kettle is cleaned, and the process begins again. Some alewives thrive, passing their knowledge to daughters. Others fail, falling into debt or fines. But for centuries they remain a pillar of nourishment, not through food but through drink. So the next time you imagine a medieval town square, do not forget the quiet corner where steam rises from a copper pot, where a woman leans over her fire, and where a single mug of warm ale carries the taste of barley, labour and care. Now let us turn from hearth and barrel to parchment and pen, for in medieval Europe food was not only cooked and eaten, it was regulated, controlled not just by customs and seasons but by law. Imagine a town square at dawn, cobblestones still wet from overnight rain. A butcher unrolls a cloth from his cart, revealing fresh cuts of pork. Across the way, a fishmonger arranges his wares atop wet straw. The smells rise slowly, blood and brine, salt and smoke. But just as the first customer approaches, a man in a red cloak steps forward. He is not a priest, not a noble. He is an official, a sworn officer of the guild or the town council. His job is to inspect, to record, and if necessary, to confiscate. Because today is a Friday, and on Fridays, by both church edict and civic statute, no meat may be sold. This was not a mere suggestion. In much of medieval Europe, food laws governed what could be eaten, by whom, on which days, and under what conditions. These laws were a reflection of both spiritual ideals and civic order. They were enforced, sometimes harshly, by men with ledgers and authority. The most common restrictions centered around religious observance. Fasting days, Wednesdays, Fridays, and the full 40 days of Lent required abstinence from meat. Fish was permitted. So were dairy and eggs, depending on the region and the season. But mutton, beef, and fowl were forbidden. To sell meat on a fast day was not simply a matter of disobedience, it was a violation of spiritual discipline. The Church taught that such days purified the soul, connected the faithful with the suffering of Christ, and encouraged modesty. And so, the butcher who opened his stall on a Friday risked more than a fine. He risked public censure, excommunication, or worse. But enforcement was not always simple. In cities like London or Rouen, officials posted lists of permitted foods during Lent. In some towns, wardens walked from stall to stall, checking wares, tasting dishes. At times, they resorted to dramatic measures such as publicly burning forbidden meats or parading guilty vendors through the streets. But food laws extended beyond the spiritual. There were laws about weights and measures. A loaf of bread had to meet a standard size. A mug of ale had to be filled to the line. Vendors who shortchanged customers could be fined, whipped, or made to sit in the pillory with a mouldy loaf hung around their neck. There were laws about freshness. Fishmongers were forbidden to sell spoiled herring. Bakers could not use sour flour. Milk sellers were watched closely, accused often of watering down their product. And while there was little understanding of bacteria, people knew the signs of rot, and so did the inspectors. There were even laws about appearance. A cook could not add saffron to a dish merely to simulate richness. A butcher could not dye old meat red to make it seem fresh. Fraud in food was fraud against the body and against the soul. Guilds enforced many of these rules. Bakers, butchers, brewers, and vintners all formed associations to control their trades. They set prices, maintained standards, and policed their own members. To be expelled from a guild was to lose your livelihood. But sometimes the law was not about what you could not sell, but what you must. In times of scarcity, bakers were compelled to produce bread at a set price, even at a loss. In wartime, cooks were required to feed soldiers. During plague, food sellers were often forced to stay open, lest famine join disease in haunting the streets. Of course, not all obeyed. Markets were filled with whispers. Some butchers sold lamb in secret. Some alewives watered their brew. Some fishmongers kept old stock in hidden barrels. And the townspeople often looked the other way, because hunger, as ever, made laws bend. Still, the framework endured. Food was too important to be left ungoverned. It shaped the body, the economy, the soul. It linked the peasant to the priest, the cook to the council. And in that cobbled square at dawn, the red-cloaked officer moves on. The butcher sighs. He covers his pork with cloth. Tomorrow, perhaps, it will be legal again. The fishmonger smiles. Today is his day. And the laws of food, written in ink and enforced by men with boots and books, remain silent but ever present in every bite taken under the cathedral's shadow. Today, when we think of a recipe, we picture tidy lists, precise measurements, step-by-step instructions, baking times, serving suggestions. But in the medieval world, cookbooks were something else entirely. Not instructional manuals as we know them, but glimpses into kitchens, both grand and humble, part memory, part shorthand, part mystery. Let us step into a small scriptorium, perhaps attached to a monastery or a noble's household. The air is still. A monk or a clerk dips a quill into ink and begins to write. The parchment is expensive. Each page matters, and on that parchment, the cook's words are recorded not with the intent to teach the uninitiated, but to remind the practiced. The recipes are sparse, written in Latin, Middle English, Old French, or the language of the court. There are no quantities, no cooking times. A recipe might read, take capons and boil them. Add almond milk and saffron. Temper with verjuice. Serve hot. There is no mention of how many capons, how long to boil, how much saffron. Even the preparation, should the meat be chopped, left whole, boned, is left unsaid. Because these were not recipes for beginners. They were reminders for those who already knew. Cooks trained through observation, repetition, and taste. These texts were memory aids, not lessons. One of the earliest known European cookbooks is the Form of Cury, compiled in the late 1302 by the master cooks of King Richard II's court in England. The word cury means cooking, from the Old French choir to cook. The manuscript contains over 200 recipes. Some are complex, with exotic ingredients like almond milk, dates, and sugar. Others are straightforward, focused on stews or roasts, meant for large-scale feasting. Another important work is Le Viandier, attributed to Guillaume Tirel, known as Taillevent, the cook for several French kings. His book, too, assumes knowledge. It outlines techniques, but not pedagogy. It tells what to combine, but rarely why or how. The assumption is clear: you already know your way around the fire. There were also religious cookbooks intended for monasteries or for households during fasting seasons. These focused on fish dishes, vegetable stews, and substitutes for meat and dairy. Almond milk, for instance, was used often not for dietary preference, but to comply with religious observance when cow's milk was forbidden. And what about desserts? Recipes for sweet dishes do appear: tarts filled with pears and figs, custards flavoured with rose water, fritters fried in oil and dusted with sugar. But sugar itself was rare, expensive, and not the daily indulgence it later became. What strikes the modern reader most, perhaps, is the tone. These recipes are not warm or conversational. They are clipped, confident, almost abrupt. They do not concern themselves with your preferences, your skill level, or your kitchen equipment. They are documents of survival, of prestige, and of necessity. Often, the names of the dishes are poetic, sometimes cryptic. Comine, a dish flavoured with cumin. Blanc mang, a white dish of chicken, rice, and almond milk. Mortreuse, a thick meat paste served hot. Gingerbread, not quite the gingerbread we know, but a dense cake made from breadcrumbs and honey, spiced and pressed into moulds. Cookbooks were often copied by hand, and variations abound. A single recipe might appear in 5 different manuscripts, with 5 slightly different ingredient lists. There was no standardization. And yet, this fluidity allowed for adaptation based on region, season, and the cook's discretion. These books were not found in every household. They belonged to nobles, monasteries, or wealthy merchants. For the average person, cooking was passed down orally from mother to daughter, master to apprentice. Knowledge lived in gesture, not in ink. Yet even in these silent pages we catch a whisper of the past, the care with which a pie was flavoured, the pride in a roast duck seasoned just right, the challenge of feeding 200 guests in a single night, the memory of a dish served on a holy day. In time, these manuscripts grew worn at the edges. Some were bound in leather, others tucked among account books and herbals. A few survive today, their faded ink still readable to those patient enough to learn the old hands. And as you picture them now, the cook hunched by candlelight, reading aloud from a page that offered only the briefest of guides, you begin to understand. A medieval recipe was not a command, it was an invitation to know the ingredients, to feel the fire, to trust the hand, and to cook not with instructions, but with memory. There are days in the medieval kitchen when the scent of herbs fills the air, when the fire is gentle and bread bakes slowly, warm and sweet. And then there are days like this. Butchering day. Imagine the scene not in a castle kitchen, but on the edge of a village. A wooden table stands beneath an open shelter, part barn, part work area built to allow light, air, and easy cleaning. The ground is covered in straw. A small trough sits nearby, ready for waste. A basin, filled earlier from the well, waits to rinse tools and hands. The animal is brought forward, most often a pig, sometimes a goat or sheep, more rarely a cow. It has been fattened over weeks, sometimes months, and the day has been chosen carefully. Perhaps the weather is cold and dry, ideal for preserving. Perhaps the household needs meat for a feast, or the larder must be refilled before winter. This task is not for the faint-hearted, but neither is it taken lightly. Butchering is a ritual. It is part of life, part of the rhythm of the year. And while it is grim, it is also necessary and deeply familiar to those who live it. The blade is sharpened on a whetstone slowly, carefully, with the steady scrape of steel on stone. The process is not hurried. Precision matters more than speed. Children are sometimes kept away. Other times they watch, not with horror, but with the solemn curiosity that comes from growing up close to food's true origins. The act itself is quick. The animal is dispatched with skill, often by someone with experience, perhaps the head of the household, or a visiting butcher. There are prayers in some places. In others, silence. Once the animal is down, the work begins. The carcass is hoisted, usually by the hind legs, using a simple pulley rig or a strong branch. The throat is cut, and the blood is collected sometimes for sausage, sometimes for blood pudding. It is stirred as it cools to prevent clotting. Then comes the skinning. The hide is removed with slow, practiced strokes. Every inch is saved, dried, and later tanned. Waste is minimal. Each part has a purpose. Next, the animal is opened. The inner organs are removed, some to be eaten, others fed to dogs or pigs, or discarded. The intestines are cleaned, turned inside out, scraped, and boiled. They will become sausage casings. The meat is divided. Hams, chops, shoulders, belly. Some is cooked fresh. The rest is salted, dried, smoked, or pickled for storage. Salt is precious and used with care. The smoking shed becomes busy, its low fire sending thin trails of scent through the air. Bones are not thrown away. They are boiled for broth, cracked for marrow, or saved for tools and buttons. Even the feet are used boiled for gelatin, stewed into thick, sticky dishes that fill the belly in winter. The entire process takes hours, sometimes an entire day. It is exhausting, messy, unforgiving. And yet, for the household, it is also a kind of celebration. The fresh meat is rare, and the smell of roasting fat by evening is a sign of reward for the day's effort. Neighbors may help, and in return receive portions. Children are given bits to chew, or a small sausage, still warm from the pot. Dogs linger nearby, watchful and hopeful. In cities, the process is similar, though more regulated. Butchers work in designated areas, under guild supervision. Their stalls are lined with wooden slabs, their aprons thick with layers of stain. They work fast, efficiently, serving both rich and poor. On certain days, animals are slaughtered in great numbers before feast days, during festivals, or for supplying monasteries and armies. The smell is overwhelming, the noise constant. Yet even here, there is rhythm. There are songs, jokes, and familiar movements. The knife passes down the same lines. The joints are known by heart. Butchering day is not pretty. It is not poetic, but it is deeply human. It ties the cook to the land, the household to the animal, the eater to the process. In a world before plastic packaging and distant farms, meat came not from shelves, but from effort, from skill, and from a day spent ankle-deep in straw and steam. And when the sun sets, and the tools are washed, and the fire is lit for roasting, there is silence, a kind of peace. The work is done, the larder is full, and for a time, the household will eat well. Far from the noise of town markets and the smells of roasting meat, there is another kind of kitchen, one where bells, not appetites, dictate the rhythm, where the meals are quiet, the ingredients modest, and the purpose of food not pleasure, but discipline. Welcome to the monastery. Imagine yourself in the cloister of a Benedictine abbey in 12th century Normandy. The walls are high and thick. The stone paths lead from garden to chapel, from dormitory to refectory. It is early morning. Mist clings to the hedges. The only sounds are birdsong and the distant tolling of a bell. The monks rise before dawn. They do not begin the day with food, but with prayer. The rule of Saint Benedict, followed in many European monasteries, demands structure. 7 times a day, they gather to chant, to read scripture, to reflect. The hours in between are filled with labor-copying manuscripts, tending bees, mending cloaks, working the fields. And then, finally, a meal. It is eaten in the refectory, a long, echoing room with wooden benches and thick walls. You walk in silence, you sit in silence, you eat in silence. One monk stands at a lectern, reading aloud from scripture or the writings of the saints. His voice carries gently over the clink of wooden spoons in bowls, the occasional shift of a bench. The meal itself is simple: a bowl of pottage, barley, peas, perhaps leeks or garlic. A slice of coarse bread, dark with bran. On better days, a bit of cheese. On feast days, fish or eggs. Meat, however, is forbidden to the monks in most orders. It is seen as indulgent, as fuel for passions rather than prayer. Vegetables form the backbone of their diet: cabbage, onions, lentils, turnips. Grown in the monastery's own garden, they are picked fresh and cooked with care. Not with spices, but with herbs, sage, parsley, thyme. Flavor is not the goal. Nourishment is. The cook is a monk himself, often an older brother, chosen not for culinary genius, but for humility and steadiness. He prepares food for dozens, sometimes hundreds. He begins before the sun rises. He stirs cauldrons over open fires. He bakes loaves in the stone oven. The kitchen, though quieter than a castle's, is still a place of labour. The fire must be tended, the water drawn, the flour ground. Tools are few, pans are heavy. The air is warm and thick with steam. But unlike in secular kitchens, there is no shouting, no scolding. The rule demands silence and focus. Fasting is regular. Entire days may pass with only one meal. Lent brings greater restrictions: no meat, no dairy, little oil. On such days, the meal may consist only of bread and water, perhaps with boiled greens or a few beans. The purpose is spiritual clarity. Hunger, in this context, is a path to humility. Meals follow the seasons. In summer, more greens. In winter, root vegetables and dried legumes. Preserving food is essential. Monks dry apples, salt fish, ferment cabbage into a sour stew. They store grain in cool cellars. Cheese is aged. Ale is brewed, weak but clean. And still, there is care in the preparation. The rule of Saint Benedict instructs that the meals, though simple, should be served with reverence. The sick are allowed more. The old are not expected to fast. The guest table separate from the brothers receives special attention. Hospitality is sacred. Some monasteries grow wealthy over time. Their kitchens expand. They produce wine, export cheese, trade honey. But the meals remain quiet, measured, meant to steady the mind, not excite the senses. When the meal is over, the bowls are cleared, the crumbs are swept, the benches are wiped. The monks return to prayer. There is no dessert, no lingering over coffee or wine, only the slow, steady rhythm of the monastic day. And so, food becomes part of that rhythm, as essential as breath, but never the focus, as reliable as dawn, but never the delight. In this world, the cook is not an artist, but a servant. The eater, not a diner, but a soul in motion. And the meal, though plain, nourishes more than the body. It anchors a life of silence, simplicity, and devotion. In a world where power was fragile and trust was rare, food so central, so necessary, could also be a threat. The more important the person, the more likely that every meal might be their last. And so, among nobles, princes, and kings, a strange role emerged: half guardian, half victim, the food taster. Imagine yourself now in the antechamber of a royal dining hall. You are dressed plainly, but with care. You are clean, alert, and you have not eaten all day. Your task is simple, to taste the king's food before he does. You are not a servant in the usual sense. You do not pour wine or carry dishes. You do not clean the hearth or scrub pots. Your job exists in the narrow space between fear and caution, between luxury and death. In theory, you are trusted. In practice, you are expendable. The taster appears in court records throughout the Middle Ages, particularly in Italy, France, and the German states. In some courts, it is an official position. In others, it rotates among trusted household staff. In certain cases, it is reserved for slaves, servants, or prisoners. Whatever the arrangement, the principle is clear. Every dish, every drink, every sweetmeat and sauce destined for the Lord's mouth first passes through yours. The practice is theatrical as well as practical. In front of guests, it sends a message. We are careful. We are not fools. We know the risks. The king waits. All eyes turn to the taster. You step forward, take a spoonful, chew slowly, swallow, a sip of wine, another bite of the pastry. Then you wait, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. Because not all poisons act quickly. Arsenic, the favorite of political rivals, can take time to show its effects. So can powdered metals slipped into sauces. Nightshade, hemlock, monkshood, each carries its own signature of symptoms: sweating, weakness, confusion. You do not speak of this, but you know the signs. You've seen the steward dismissed after a fainting fit. You've heard of tasters who became suddenly ill and were never seen again. But most days there is nothing. The food is safe, the meal proceeds, the king eats, the guests smile, the danger passes like a cloud overhead. Still, the cook feels the tension. Even if the food is flawless, even if no harm comes, the mere presence of a taster is a reminder. Trust is limited. Paranoia lingers. Sometimes, poison is not the only fear. Spoiled meat can mimic its effects. Moldy grain, fermented fish, improperly stored cheese, all can cause illness. A taster protects the noble not just from enemies, but from rot, from mishap, from ignorance. In some courts, the taster is well treated, given fine clothes, a seat near the hearth, respected by the kitchen and the stewards, but rarely envied. In others, the taster is little more than a living shield. A taster might eat 50 dishes a day, never a full portion, just a bite, enough to catch the edge of danger. Over time, this work takes its toll. The stomach grows cautious, the tongue grows weary. Every meal becomes a test. Yet still, the taster must remain calm. To panic at every cramp would insult the cook. To flinch at every sip would insult the host. You learn to smile, to bow, to move on. There are legends, of course, tales of tasters who recognized poison by smell alone, who saved kings, exposed traitors, who fell dead with a single swallow, honored in passing and soon forgotten. And then there are quieter stories of men and women who tasted their lord's meals for decades, who retired quietly, whose names were never written down. Because in the end, a food taster's greatest achievement is invisibility. To taste and not be remembered, to protect and not be known. And so, at every noble table, between the golden platter and the royal mouth, there is one last barrier, one final mouth. Yours. Behind every skilled cook in a medieval kitchen, there was once a boy or girl with burnt fingers, sore knees, and a heart full of quiet determination. The medieval kitchen did not wait for adulthood. It demanded hands small, fast, obedient, and so children entered the world of cooking early, not by choice, but by necessity, inheritance, or arrangement. Let us imagine one of them now, a boy of 10, or perhaps a girl of 12, born to a family of servants, or sent from a nearby village in exchange for a small coin and the promise of training. Their name is not important in the records, but they are there, kneeling on cold stone, scrubbing pots, eyes flicking upward to follow the master's movements. They are called an apprentice, or a kitchen boy, or simply the help. And their day begins before the sky shifts from black to blue. First comes the fire. Before any food is prepared, the hearth must be stoked. It is their job to clear the ashes, gather wood from the shed, and coax the flames to life. Their hands blacken with soot. The heat reddens their cheeks. They learn quickly how to tend the embers without being burned. Then come the chores. They peel onions, bucket water from the well, rinse herbs gathered at dawn. They beat eggs with bundles of twigs, grind oats on a quern stone, sweep the kitchen floor again and again. They carry messages from the steward to the pantry, from the scullery to the larder, from the herb garden to the main hall. Their tools are few, their wages, if any, are meagre, but they are learning, not from books, not from written recipes, but from watching, mimicking, repeating. They memorize the way flour should fall from a scoop, the right rhythm for turning a spit, the moment when a stew darkens and needs more stock. They are spoken to rarely, but corrected often. A mistake earns not just scolding, but more work. They are often tired, their feet ache, their ears ring from the shouting of the head cook, and yet they begin to understand. Over time, they are allowed more, perhaps the trimming of greens, the kneading of dough, the layering of a meat pie. Their hands grow steadier. They are taught how to sharpen a knife, how to wash herbs without crushing them, how to test the heat of a pan with a splash of water. By 14, some are allowed to taste dishes before serving. By 16, they might oversee a small task boiling eggs for the morning, or tending the simmering broth through the lunch hour. Their opinions are not asked, but if they move with confidence, no one stops them. The apprenticeship is long, often 7 years, and it may not lead to glory. A few rise to become head cooks in noble households. Fewer still gain fame in royal courts. Most remain anonymous, working behind the scenes for decades, known only by their steadiness and silence. Girls, too, worked in kitchens, though their paths were more complicated. Some were apprenticed formally, especially in cities. Others worked under the watch of the mistress of the house, learning to prepare meals for smaller gatherings. Their fates were often tied to marriage or continued service, but their presence was constant peeling, boiling, cleaning, serving. There were risks. Burns, slips, and knife wounds were common. There was no medicine beyond a poultice, no protective gear, no days off. Illness meant lost wages, and punishment should they drop a dish or speak out of turn could be swift. And yet, many stayed. Why? Because the kitchen, for all its demands, offered a kind of path, a skill, a place, a future that, for a child of no title and little coin, might be otherwise unreachable. A good apprentice was noticed. A reliable one was kept on. A clever one could one day hold the keys to the pantry, the authority to order ingredients, even the right to speak directly to the lord or lady of the house. The transition from child to cook was slow, invisible, made not with ceremony, but with trust. One day, the master turns and says, "Watch that pot." The next week, "Cut the onions." Then, quietly, "You'll take the stew tonight." And just like that, the child is no longer a child. They are a cook. They stand taller, their aprons stained but tied with care. They know the kitchen now, not just its tools and tasks, but its breath, its timing, its silence. And as they stir the broth or lift the bread from the oven, perhaps they glance to the corner where another child now scrubs the hearth, eyes wide. And so the cycle begins again. Not all who laboured in the medieval kitchen arrived by way of training or apprenticeship. Some were placed there by force, by penance, or by punishment. because in a world that prized order and obedience, the kitchen, hot, hard, and humbling, became a natural setting for correction. Imagine now a monastery or noble estate not during a feast or festival, but during a quiet week in early autumn. A boy has misbehaved, disrespected a master, or broken a household rule. A novice monk has faltered in his duties, missed prayers, or shown arrogance. A wayward girl in the convent has spoken out of turn. A servant has failed in their tasks. Their punishment? The kitchen. It is not a place of glamour. It is not a reward. It is long hours on your feet, ash in your eyes, sore arms and blistered fingers. And for the punished, it is meant to remind. In monastic life, the kitchen was often assigned as part of a rota, a rotating duty. But for those being disciplined, the assignment could be extended. Silence was expected. Repetition was enforced. A monk who once copied books in a cool scriptorium might now find himself rinsing vegetables before dawn or cleaning greasy ladles until vespers. For young apprentices in secular households, the kitchen was both proving ground and threat. Disobedience might be met with a day of hauling buckets from the well. Breaking a plate might earn a week of washing every dish by hand, with freezing water and coarse sand. For noble children, rarely punished with physical force, the kitchen represented something else entirely: humility. A noble boy sent to the kitchen was not meant to learn cooking. He was meant to learn patience, obedience, and the lowly status of those who served. It was not uncommon for wayward sons to be sent to a neighbouring estate, made to work in the scullery or pantry under watchful eyes. Even if only for a few days, the lesson was meant to linger. In nunneries and convents, women who defied authority, spoke too freely, showed vanity, or neglected their devotions might find themselves grinding grain, scrubbing pots, or tending the ovens. These were not dangerous tasks, but they were relentless and often isolating. The kitchen's nature made it ideal for such discipline. It was enclosed, away from public view. It required constant work. There was no space for idle hands. Every task led to another: washing, chopping, peeling, stirring, hauling, scrubbing, drying, sweeping. And for those sent there under discipline, the work never seemed to end. There was no praise, no gentle correction, only tasks assigned and reassigned, often in silence, with little explanation. Time passed slowly in the heat and steam, each hour marked not by bells, but by aching legs and the scraping of knives. Even within prisons and hospitals, kitchens served this dual purpose, both service and punishment. Inmates might be assigned to cook for their fellow prisoners, not as reward, but as penance. Mental asylums, rare and rudimentary, sometimes tasked patients with kitchen work as a form of control. But there is a strange truth hidden within this use of labour as punishment. The kitchen, though intended to humble, also gave structure. Those who entered in disgrace sometimes found a kind of rhythm, a task that required no interpretation, a world where work equaled completion and where hands could stay busy while the mind quieted. In some cases, punished workers gained skill. A stable boy who learned to boil oats, a scribe who learned to bake bread, a novice who began to enjoy the quiet repetition of chopping roots in the morning light. Not all stories ended that way. For many, the kitchen remained a place of drudgery. The steam clung too thickly, the hours dragged too slowly, the burns never quite healed. But the kitchen did not judge. It asked no questions. It simply demanded work. And in the world of the Middle Ages, where correction often took the form of solitude or violence, the kitchen offered something different, a quiet, grinding labour that both diminished and, occasionally, transformed. When the punishment ended, the person returned to their former duties. But perhaps they walked a little slower, kept their voice quieter, remembered the feel of smoke on their skin and the sound of boiling broth in the early dark. Because punishment in the kitchen left few visible marks, but it etched itself in memory, a lesson served without words. As most of the medieval town sleeps, shutters closed, candles spent, dogs curled beneath carts, a few are already at work. Their fires lit before the stars fade, their feet moving swiftly through still dark streets. These are the bakers, the market vendors, the invisible early risers who prepare food not for themselves, but for the day ahead. Let us step into that darkness. It is sometime past midnight. The moon hangs low over the rooftops of a bustling town, perhaps Ghent or York or Prague. The air is cool, damp with night fog, and somewhere nearby, a bell rings once from a chapel tower. In a low building near the town square, the baker is already kneading dough. His fire was lit an hour ago. The coals are glowing. The oven, made of stone or brick, is slowly warming its walls thick and blackened from years of use. There are no timers, only experience. A good baker knows by touch when the heat is right, by scent when the bread is done. Flour was ground the day before, carried in burlap sacks. Water was drawn, salt measured, yeast coaxed from a starter saved the week before. There is no pause. The dough is mixed in great wooden troughs, kneaded with strong hands, turned, folded, and allowed to rest beneath rough cloths. This is not a solitary task. A baker may have 2, even 3 apprentices, children or youths who mix, sweep, carry, and watch. They rise when the baker rises. They work in silence, broken only by the slap of dough against board, the hiss of steam from the oven mouth, the occasional crack of the fire being fed. By 3 in the morning, the first loaves are ready to go in. The bread varies by purpose and wealth. There are coarse loaves, rye and barley, brown with bits of husk. There are finer ones made with bolted flour, pale and smooth. Some loaves are large, for slicing and soaking. Others are small, shaped to be sold quickly to travellers or labourers. A few might even be sweetened with honey, dried fruit, or nuts, luxuries for those who can pay. But most are plain. Nourishment, not indulgence. The oven itself is deep, round, with no separate door or shelf. Loaves are placed inside with a long-handled peel, a wide, flat paddle. The heat is radiant, all-encompassing. The baker must know where to place each loaf near the hottest walls at first, then rotating as the crust forms. There is no clock. The bread tells its own time. By 4 or 5 in the morning, the first batch is ready. The apprentices wrap the hot loaves in cloth or place them in wide baskets. Some are loaded onto carts and carried through the streets. Others are stacked by the shop door. As the town begins to wake, candles flickering in upstairs windows, footsteps echoing on the cobblestones, the scent of warm bread drifts through the alleys. It is the smell of promise, of effort unseen. And just as the baker's work slows, the market begins to stir. Vendors arrive with their carts and crates. A woman sets out dried fish. A man unloads apples, still cool from the orchard. Cheese wheels are stacked carefully, their rinds marked with chalk. Chickens cluck in cages. Barrels are opened. Sacks of onions spill onto rough cloth. The town market is not a fixed building, but an open space, perhaps under a covered roof or in the shadow of a cathedral. Each vendor has their spot, passed down or rented, measured with rope or stones. By 6 o'clock, the square is busy. Buyers arrive, housewives, stewards, servants, cooks. They carry baskets, pouches, sometimes lists. They haggle quietly. A few coins change hands. A joke, a nod, the first sale of the day. Among the busiest stalls, the bread cart. Still warm, still fragrant, the loaves sell fast. Bakers who delivered too late lose their spot. Those who rise earlier gain the day's edge. There is pride in this rhythm. It repeats daily, uncelebrated but essential. Bakers are rarely seen at midday. By then they sleep. Their ovens rest. Their work, already done, fuels the city's hours. Their loaves become part of the stew, the table, the child's hand. And in the silence of the afternoon, the baker prepares again. Flour, water, salt, heat, another night, another dawn, another crowd to feed. To understand how medieval people ate, one must understand how often they did not. The church, ever present in the rhythms of daily life, did not simply influence meals, it structured them. Through fasting days, feast days, vigils, and seasons like Lent, food became an instrument of spiritual discipline. It was a symbol of restraint, a measure of piety, and occasionally a quiet game of bending rules without breaking them. Let us enter a quiet village parish on the first morning of Lent. The joyous feast of Shrovetide has passed. The tables have been cleared of meat and dairy. Pancakes were eaten, ale was shared, and the household larders have been scoured of indulgence. Now comes the long fast. Lent lasts for 40 days, not counting Sundays. During this time, the Church forbids the consumption of meat, animal fat, and, in stricter regions, dairy and eggs. The rules are meant to reflect the hardships of Christ in the wilderness, a time of reflection, sacrifice, and purification. For ordinary people, this means rethinking every meal. Gone are the stews made with beef fat or bacon. Instead, peasants turn to pulses, lentils, beans, and chickpeas, along with onions, cabbages, and whatever root vegetables have survived the winter. Bread continues, of course, but without the smear of butter or lard. Water or weak ale replaces richer drinks. Fish becomes the substitute of choice. Not fresh fish for most, but salted, dried, or smoked cod, herring, eel. Some communities living near rivers or coasts enjoy fresh catches, while others rely on preserved barrels imported over long distances. Yet the fasting rules are complex and, in time, creative. For example, aquatic animals were considered fair game. Not only fish, but also beavers, whose tails were thought to resemble fish flesh, were permitted. In some regions, puffins and otters also found their way onto Lenten tables, their classification bending under the weight of ecclesiastical reasoning. Almond milk, made by grinding nuts and mixing them with water, became a common dairy substitute. It appeared in sauces, soups, even desserts, used not only for its taste, but because it technically complied with the fasting codes. It was more expensive than cow's milk, but popular among wealthier households. Eggs, though forbidden in stricter orders, found their way back into recipes in more lenient regions. Sometimes they were claimed to be medicinal. Sometimes they were baked into dishes where their presence could be concealed or denied. And then there were feast days within Lent itself. On Sundays, the fasting restrictions were lifted slightly, allowing a more substantial meal, though not a full return to indulgence. On these days, cooks often prepared finer Lenten fare, fruit tarts with almond cream, fish pies delicately spiced, and breads enriched with oil. The rich had more options. Their cooks were adept at making Lenten dishes look and taste indulgent. They used expensive spices, ginger, cinnamon, saffron to flavor otherwise plain stews. They shaped pastries to resemble meat, filled with fish or mushrooms instead. They served mock eggs, made from almond paste, colored and shaped to resemble the forbidden. But, for the poor, Lent was real restraint. The hunger grew sharper by the third or fourth week. The root cellar began to empty. The salted fish, soaked in water for days to soften, grew ever tougher. The body thinned, yet the season persisted. And still, Lent was not merely a burden. It was also a shared ritual, a communal practice that united households, parishes, towns. It marked the calendar as surely as the seasons. It offered rhythm, purpose, and a path toward Easter's promised abundance. In monasteries, fasting was stricter. Some orders forbade even the taste of oil or the smell of roasting flesh during Lent. Their meals silent, sparse, meditative, focused the mind on scripture, not on appetite. But even here, loopholes crept in. Herbs were used generously. Fish was traded carefully. On occasion, a slightly too rich broth might pass without comment. Children were often exempt, as were the sick, the elderly, and pregnant women, but they too felt the season's effects, the altered meals, the quieter kitchens, the long days between treats. By the end of Lent, hunger had become familiar. Meals had grown repetitive, and when Easter finally arrived, marked by bells, processions, and celebration, the tables groaned with food once more. Roasted lamb, fresh cheese, eggs, boiled and painted, pies, pastries, sweets. The fast was over. The loopholes were no longer needed. And for a brief time, even the poorest ate well, the memory of restraint giving shape to the joy of abundance. In this, the medieval kitchen was not only a place of flavour, but of faith, where every meal, and every missing meal, told a story of belief, of adaptation, and of a people shaped as much by what they could not eat as by what they could. Not all ingredients arrived by cart or coin. Some were grown just steps from the kitchen door, nurtured by patient hands, watered with care, and harvested as needed not for profit, but for flavour, healing, and balance. This was the kitchen garden, small, simple, and profoundly essential. Let us walk now into the soft light of early morning. The dew is still on the leaves. A low stone wall surrounds a patch of earth, neatly divided into beds and rows. A narrow path runs through the middle, worn smooth by countless footsteps. Beyond the wall a manor rises, or perhaps a monastery, its stone walls dappled with shadow. Inside this garden everything has a place and a purpose. There are herbs, first and foremost. Parsley, with its crisp, green brightness, used to freshen sauces or garnish platters. Sage, strong and woodsy, often paired with fatty meats to balance heaviness. Thyme, delicate and fragrant, added to soups and stews. Rosemary, both culinary and symbolic, believed to strengthen memory. Mint grows in a damp corner, eager and sprawling, used to season lamb or to scent the washing water for guests. Dill, fennel and lovage rise in wispy stalks. Chives and garlic shoots stand like tiny green spears. These herbs are not just for taste, they are medicine too. The kitchen garden often overlaps with the physic garden, especially in monasteries. Chamomile to calm the stomach, horehound for cough, rue for cleansing, hyssop for wounds. The line between food and remedy is thin, often blurred. Near the herbs grow vegetables modest, hardy, and seasonal. Cabbages form tight, waxy heads. Leeks and onions push up through dark soil. Broad beans climb along woven trellises. Turnips and parsnips grow beneath the surface, their leaves rustling in the wind. In spring, young greens like sorrel and nettle are gathered for soups. In summer, beans, carrots, and herbs are picked daily. In autumn, the harvest grows heavier squash, garlic, late herbs to dry and hang. There are no exotic fruits here, no tomatoes or potatoes, those come much later. But there may be currants, gooseberries, or even a single plum tree at the garden's edge. The work is steady. A cook or servant comes each morning to clip herbs, to tug up what is ready, to turn the soil. In some estates, the garden is overseen by the cook himself. In monasteries, it is the duty of a brother gardener, who moves silently between rows with spade and basket. There is no irrigation system. Water is drawn by hand, poured from wooden buckets. Compost is made from scraps and ash, mixed into the earth slowly. Pests are a constant concern: slugs, birds, insects. Remedies include ash, crushed garlic, sharp smells. The kitchen garden reflects the season more honestly than any pantry. It forces the kitchen to adapt. When mint is plentiful, it is added to salads. When onions bolt, they are pulled and dried. When parsley wilts, another herb takes its place. And in winter, the garden rests. Beds are covered, tools are stored, herbs are dried and hung in bundles from the rafters of the kitchen, their scents mingling with smoke and bread. To a modern eye, the garden may seem small, but in the medieval world, it is a treasure. It offers not only ingredients, but autonomy. A cook with access to fresh herbs can elevate even the plainest dish. A broth of onions and parsley becomes soothing, not dull. A loaf seasoned with dill speaks of thoughtfulness. The kitchen garden also provides symbolism. Certain herbs are linked to virtues: sage for wisdom, rosemary for remembrance, rue for regret. They appear in religious feasts, wedding meals, funeral breads. And though it is a place of quiet utility, it is also beautiful. In the warm months, bees hover over blossoms, butterflies pause on thyme flowers. The wind carries the scent of crushed mint and damp soil. Birds pick at the edges. Cats sleep beneath the rosemary. It is a place where the cook breathes more deeply, where hands, so often burned and blistered in the kitchen, touch something cool and living, where the ingredients are not bought but grown, not hurried but nurtured. And so, the kitchen garden becomes more than a space. It is an anchor, a reminder that even in a world of smoke and knives, there is gentleness in growth. That nourishment begins in soil, not salt. And that the slow turning of seasons, marked by the sprouting of chives or the browning of fennel, offers a rhythm older and more enduring than any recipe. Before refrigeration, before iceboxes or insulated cellars, medieval cooks faced a constant challenge: how to make food last. Without reliable preservation, abundance was fleeting. A successful hunt could turn to waste in a matter of days. A well-stocked larder might spoil in the heat of summer. And in winter, when the garden slept and the markets thinned, what remained on the shelf could mean the difference between comfort and hunger. Preserving food, then, was not a luxury, it was a necessity, and few tools were more important than salt and ice. Let us return to a manor kitchen in mid-autumn. The leaves outside have turned, the evenings grow shorter, the air carries the first crisp edge of frost. This is the season of storing, salting, drying, and curing, when the work of summer is packed away to sustain the long, lean months ahead. Salt is first and foremost. It arrives in rough sacks, grey or white, coarse crystals scooped by hand. It may come from inland salt mines dug laboriously from deep within the earth, or from coastal salt pans, where seawater is trapped in shallow pools and left to evaporate beneath the sun. Salt is precious. It is traded across great distances, taxed heavily, and counted carefully. It is kept in locked pantries. To steal salt is to threaten survival. Meat is preserved with salt through a process both simple and time-consuming. Cuts of pork or beef are rubbed with salt generously, thoroughly, and packed into wooden barrels. The salt draws out moisture, inhibiting the growth of bacteria. Over days or weeks, the meat becomes dry, firm, and darker in color. Some meats are then smoked, hung above slow fires, fed with specific woods: oak for richness, applewood for sweetness. The smoke helps preserve, but also flavors, imbuing the meat with a scent that lingers through the winter. Fish, too, is salted, especially cod and herring, which are staples in many regions. Caught in great quantities, cleaned and split, they are layered with salt and pressed. The result is dry, hard, and long-lasting. Salted fish can survive months without spoiling, though it must be soaked and softened before cooking. Cheese is another method of preservation. Milk spoils quickly, but when curdled, pressed, and aged, it becomes durable. Some cheeses are soft and meant for immediate use. Others, harder and drier, can last through entire seasons. They are stored in cool cellars, wrapped in cloth or sealed with wax. Grains, dried beans, and legumes are naturally long-lasting. They are stored in sacks, kept off the ground, protected from damp and pests. The pantry is swept regularly. Herbs are dried and bundled, hanging from the beams. Apples and pears are packed in straw, inspected weekly for signs of rot. Ice, while less accessible, is used in some regions, especially in noble households and monasteries with the resources to collect and store it. In the depths of winter, when ponds and rivers freeze, labourers cut blocks of ice with iron saws. These are hauled to ice houses, underground chambers lined with stone, packed with straw, shaded year-round. The ice is layered carefully, insulated against the warmth of spring. In warmer months, these ice stores are used sparingly, to cool wine, to preserve delicate foods like cream or fruit for brief periods. It is a luxury rare, fleeting, and never wasted. In northern climates, natural cold assists preservation. Food can be hung in unheated rooms, placed near windows, or buried in snow. In southern climates, preservation relies more on drying grapes into raisins, plums into prunes, figs into leathery, sweet bundles. Preserving food is not only practical, it is also cultural. Each region develops its own traditions. In Italy, thinly sliced prosciutto is salted and air-dried until it becomes translucent and savoury. In England, salted eels are coiled into jars, sold in barrels. In the German lands, sauerkraut fermented cabbage is prepared in great ceramic crocks weighed down with stones. Fermentation, like salting, is both science and art. Pickles are made with brine. Vinegar is brewed and stored. Ale, mead, and wine are not just drinks, but preserved forms of grain and fruit made safer through transformation. And in all of this, the cook plays a vital role. They test the meat for spoilage. They scrape the salt barrel. They turn the cheese. They slice, pack, hang, and record. They know how long a joint of beef can last, how to spot the fine mold that means discard or salvage. Preservation is not just preparation, it is insurance. Against crop failure, against harsh winters, against the absence of trade, and though it may seem unremarkable to the modern eye, a well-stocked medieval pantry was a quiet triumph, a reflection of labour, foresight and knowledge passed down not in books, but in tasks done each year without fail. The salted meats hang in rows, the dried herbs rustle in the breeze. The cheese rests cool beneath its cloth. The barrels of grain sit firm against the wall, and outside, the frost creeps closer. But inside, the kitchen is ready. The kitchens of the poor were places of necessity, humble, repetitive, frugal. The kitchens of the merchant class were places of ambition, careful, creative, and hopeful. But the kitchens of the royal court, these were temples of excess, of showmanship, of precision so fine that even the king's appetite became a matter of state. Let us now cross the threshold of one such kitchen, perhaps in the court of France's Charles V or England's Henry II, beyond the great halls and inner courtyards, behind a series of guarded doors and high walls, lies the heart of the royal household's provisions, the pantry. But not just a pantry as we imagine it, a shelf with tins and bread. In the medieval royal world, the pantry was a whole department, a sprawling, meticulously organized system of rooms, staff, and records dedicated to storing, protecting, and preparing the food that would sustain and impress the sovereign. The word pantry comes from the Old French paneterie, which itself derives from panis, meaning bread. Originally, it referred specifically to the place where bread was stored and sliced, but over time, it expanded to include all dry provisions, flour, grains, biscuits, spices, cheese, even precious nuts and sugar. Alongside the pantry were other specialized departments: the buttery, for wine and ale, the saucery, for sauces and condiments, the scullery, for washing, the larder, for meats, and the spicery for spices and sweetmeats. Each was its own realm, overseen by appointed officers sworn to their duties. Within the royal pantry, nothing was left to guesswork. Large wooden chests lined the walls, iron-bound and locked. Barrels of grain stood upright on thick planks, protected from rats with raised flooring and tightly fitted lids. Sacks of almonds, boxes of preserved fruit, wheels of imported cheese from distant provinces, all labelled, inspected, and carefully tallied. At the centre of it all, the pantry clerk and the master of the pantry. They kept ledgers, often written in fine script on thick parchment. These books recorded every item taken in or sent out, not just flour or sugar, but how much, from where, for what meal, and on whose order. Each royal meal had a list. What bread was required? How many loaves? Were they to be white bread for the king, or coarser rye for the lower court? What pies were to be served, and how much almond paste was needed? Which spices had to be weighed and delivered to the sorcery? How much cinnamon for the roasted pears? How much saffron for the golden broth? The pantry answered all these questions. The pantry also acted as gatekeeper. If a cook needed a pound of butter, he had to request it. If the spicery demanded more cloves, a scribe recorded the transfer. If the bread was late, the pantry was blamed. If it was stale, the source had to be found. Security was tight. Theft was not uncommon, and punishment severe. A missing wedge of cheese could lead to dismissal. A vanishing bag of pepper might prompt an inquiry. For spices and sugar, which were costly enough to rival silver, the chests were double-locked, and the keys rarely left the steward's belt. The royal pantry also reflected diplomacy. Exotic ingredients sent as gifts, figs from the Levant, candied ginger from the East, wine from Bordeaux arrived at the pantry, where they were catalogued, tasted, and occasionally paraded before being stored. These items often graced the table not only for flavour, but as political theatre. This dish, it said, was made possible by our allies abroad, but the pantry's records also reveal the king's cravings. Some monarchs preferred sweet dishes, ordering more sugar, honey, and fruits. Others demanded meat in every meal: venison, swan, peacock. Some had aversions, refusing garlic or banning certain herbs. The pantry, through its notes and patterns, became a silent witness to royal taste. In times of illness, the pantry stocked more broth. In times of war, it arranged for portable food hardtack, dried meat, spiced pastes for travel. In times of peace, it grew more extravagant marzipan sculptures, elaborate sugar confections, pies shaped like castles. The pantry was more than storage. It was the nervous system of royal appetite. Its records, when they survive, tell stories not only of meals but of days, feasts for coronations, fasts during Lent, morning meals with black bread and no spice, celebratory dishes to mark a birth or victory. And for the cooks, the pantry was both ally and obstacle. Without it, they had no materials. With it, they had accountability. Every scoop of flour, every slice of cheese, every pinch of nutmeg tracked, weighed, and expected to become something worthy of a king. So the next time you picture a medieval royal meal, remember this: behind the sparkle of goblets and the shimmer of gravy, behind the glint of golden cutlery and the hum of music, lay a quiet room filled with shelves, scrolls, and sacks. The pantry, silent, watchful, absolutely essential. There is perhaps no more difficult kitchen than the one set up in the middle of a field. No walls, no hearth, no pantry shelves, just mud, smoke, and the endless appetite of marching men. Feeding a medieval army was a task of grim logistics, constant improvisation, and immense labour. The soldier might dream of glory, but the cook, shoulder-deep in bubbling cauldrons or hauling sacks of barley across churned earth, dreamed only of something hot, filling, and ready before dusk. Let us picture an army encampment during a campaign perhaps under Edward III, marching through France during the 100 Years' War. Thousands of men, hundreds of horses, wagons, camp followers, and tents stretched across a damp field. The kitchens, if they can be called that, are rudimentary. There are no built structures. Fires are dug into shallow pits, ringed with stones. Tripods are set up, and iron kettles hang heavy and soot-blackened over low flames. Smoke drifts constantly, mingling with the scents of sweat, earth, and wet wool. The food is functional. Each day, the army must be fed. Bread is a staple baked days in advance, carried in rough sacks, hardening slowly with each passing mile. Salted meat is common pork, beef, sometimes fish tough and briny, boiled in water until it softens, its flavour dull but sustaining. Grain is boiled into pottage, a thick porridge-like dish made from oats, barley or peas. Into it go scraps of meat, dried onions or foraged greens. The cook stirs with a wooden paddle, tasting only when the fire flickers low. Spices are rare, fat is rationed, the food is bland but warm. Each soldier is often issued rations, bread, dried beans, dried or salted meat, and expected to prepare his own meal or share with his unit. But larger groups have designated cooks, sometimes drawn from servants, sometimes soldiers too wounded or too old to fight. There are no individual meals, no separate dishes. Food is prepared in large batches, served in bowls or trenchers carved from bread or wood, shared around the fire. Fingers tear, dip, and scoop. Utensils are few. Cleanliness is hopeful, not guaranteed. When supplies run low, foraging becomes vital. Men scour the countryside for vegetables, fruit, or animals. A lucky find, a wild pig, a hen, an orchard left unguarded might feed dozens. But this is risky. In enemy territory, foraging can mean ambush or arrest. In friendly lands, it can spark resentment. Supply lines, when they exist, are slow and uncertain. Wagons creak along muddy roads, bearing barrels of salt pork, wheels of cheese, casks of ale. Delays are frequent. Spoilage is common. A single rainstorm can make a road impassable. A skirmish can scatter the convoy. And when food fails, morale breaks. History is filled with battles lost not on the field, but in the belly. Armies that starved before fighting. Soldiers too weak to hold a sword. Men deserting not from fear but from hunger. Cooks, in this world, hold quiet power. Their work is overlooked, but vital. A warm meal lifts spirits. A dry loaf sustains a march. A well-boiled broth can soothe a fevered man or revive a wounded one. When armies siege a city, cooking becomes even more precarious. Fires must be hidden from view. Supplies dwindle. Rats become a meal. Mouldy grain is soaked and strained. A pot of stew might stretch for days. In winter campaigns, ice freezes fingers before the bread can thaw. In summer, flies swarm the salted meat. Yet the cooks keep stirring, keep chopping, keep feeding. There are no recipe books here, no ledgers or spice racks, just fire, pot, and hope. And when the army moves again, marching before dawn, boots crunching frost or mud, the cook is among the last to pack up. He douses the fire, scrapes the pot, loads the spoons, and walks to the next field, the next camp, the next meal made from little. In the grand tales of conquest, the generals are remembered, the battles named, the kings immortalized. But behind every day of survival, every march completed, every sword lifted in the morning light, there is a meal that made it possible, boiled, bland, and eaten with fingers, cooked in a field, in a tent, in the mud. Before most people rise, before the bread is baked or the bells ring for prime, the fishmonger is already at work, elbow deep in scales and salt, sorting his wares by light from a flickering lantern. Let us walk with him now, in the dimness of pre-dawn, through a narrow street that leads to the market square. The smell comes first, pungent, earthy, unmistakable. The mingled scent of fresh-caught fish, damp burlap, wet straw, and the faint metallic tang of seawater. The medieval fishmonger occupies a vital, if unglamorous, place in the food economy. For towns near rivers, lakes, or coasts, he is a daily presence. For inland cities, he becomes a connection to the outside world, bringing the ocean into landlocked homes. But the trade is not for the faint of heart. His day begins while others sleep. If he lives near the coast, he may be on the shore before midnight, receiving the catch from fishermen hauling nets still dripping from the sea. The fish come writhing, flapping, limp or iced, depending on the season. Some are huge cod, sturgeon, even small sharks. Others, tiny and delicate sprats, smelts, anchovies, eels. For those farther inland, fish arrives by cart, packed in barrels of brine, stacked in straw, laid on cool stone slabs, salted, smoked or dried. Time is critical. Fresh fish spoils quickly, especially in warmer months. There are no ice blocks, no refrigeration. The fishmonger must move swiftly, sort, clean, display. In the market square, his stall is often one of the first to open. A simple table, a canvas awning, baskets, basins, and knives. He lays the fish in rows by type, by size, by price. Herring here, salmon there. The more unusual finds, conger eel, lamprey, shellfish, are displayed prominently to catch the early eye. Cleaning is done on site, guts removed, scales scraped, heads sometimes left on for proof of freshness. The work is wet, slippery, and noisy. Sloshing buckets, the scrape of blades on skin, the occasional shout from a customer or vendor. The customers arrive early: housewives, cooks, servants, monks, some barter, others pay in coin. A few, especially those from noble households, arrive with written orders or special tokens, promises of payment or access to choice cuts. And behind each sale, a quiet calculation. How long will this fish last? Will it be eaten today or salted for tomorrow? Can it be sold whole, or must it be filleted and spiced to cover its fading edge? The church's fasting rules ensure demand. On Wednesdays, Fridays, and during Lent, fish is not only popular, it is necessary. This keeps the fishmonger busy year-round, especially near religious centres or monastic towns. But the business is not without risk. The market inspectors visit regularly. They test for freshness, smell the fish, examine the eyes, feel the flesh. If a vendor is caught selling spoiled goods, they may be fined, have their fish destroyed, or be paraded through the streets in shame, a rotting herring tied around their neck. The smell, though constant, becomes familiar. The fishmonger stops noticing it after a while. His hands always carry the scent, no matter how often he washes them. The scales cling to his tunic, to his boots. His nails are always edged with silver and red. But with this discomfort comes skill. He can judge a fish's freshness by sight, tell the age of a salted cod by its bend, predict the day's sales by the weather. Cold and dry sells well, hot and wet spoils faster. He knows who to trust at the docks, who to pay a little extra for the first catch, which cooks want eel, which abbots prefer trout. He remembers the child with a single coin, the merchant who always haggles too long. Some days are good, a surprise catch, a festival crowd, a high price for oysters, or a rare sturgeon head sold to a wealthy household. Other days, the fish lingers. Flies arrive, clouds gather, the market thins early. At day's end, whatever hasn't sold must be dealt with. Some is kept, resalted, smoked. Some is given away. Some is thrown to dogs or the river. The stall is washed down, the knives wiped, the baskets repacked, and the fishmonger returns home, weary, the scent of the sea clinging still to his skin. He will rise again before dawn. The sea does not sleep, and neither, really, does he. In the bustling towns of late medieval Europe, amid the clang of blacksmiths and the shuffle of weavers, the cook had a place not just by the hearth, but in the guild hall, a structured, ranked, and proudly regulated society of culinary professionals. Cooking, after all, was not only a domestic task. In cities it became a trade. And like all trades, it demanded training, certification, loyalty, and rules. Let us imagine for a moment a narrow street in Bruges or Florence or York. The signs of the guild houses hang proudly from iron brackets, a baker's peel, a cooper's barrel, a tailor's shears, and among them The cook's ladle, or pot, simple but unmistakable. The Guild of Cooks, or sometimes more precisely, the Guild of Food Professionals, included not just those who cooked, but those who baked, roasted, stewed, and prepared meals in large urban households, taverns, and inns. In larger cities, they formed their own associations, regulated by charter and sanctioned by the local council or crown. At the base of the structure stood the apprentice, usually a young boy, sometimes a girl, taken on at a young age, perhaps as early as 10. The apprentice lived with a master, worked in his kitchen, performed the most menial tasks, and began to learn the rhythm of the trade. The days were long, the work was unglamorous. But slowly, skills were gained: cutting, boiling, seasoning, timing. Apprenticeships typically lasted 7 years, though some extended longer. At the end of this period, the apprentice might become a journeyman, allowed to work for wages, to move between kitchens, to be hired by different masters. The journeyman was skilled, but not yet independent. To rise further required proof. The aspiring cook would have to submit a masterpiece, not a sculpture, but a meal, a series of dishes prepared under scrutiny, showing technique, taste, and timing. This could be staged during a festival, a guild event, or a special examination. If the guild approved, the cook became a master allowed to hire apprentices, to open their own establishment, and to use the full rights and privileges of guild membership. But the guild was more than a career ladder. It was a community. Members supported each other in sickness and age. They shared resources, advocated for fair prices, and protected trade secrets. If a foreign cook arrived in town, the guild ensured he did not undercut local prices. If a member fell ill, the guild sent bread and broth. If a member died, the guild might pay for the funeral and provide for his widow. The guild also enforced standards. Quality was paramount. A cook who served spoiled meat, misused spices, or shorted portions could be fined, or worse, expelled. Cleanliness, to the extent it was understood, was expected. Reputation mattered. A cook whose food caused illness might find himself before the magistrate. Prices were regulated. The cost of a pie, a roast, or a loaf could not be arbitrarily inflated. This protected the customer, but also maintained fairness among guild members. Guilds had colours, banners, patron saints, and feast days. Some were under the protection of St. Lawrence, martyred by fire, an apt guardian for those who laboured at the hearth. And while many members were male, some guilds did admit women, especially in baking and confectionery. In Paris, records show women running kitchens, managing staff, even earning master status in certain food guilds. Their presence, though often under-recorded, was constant and vital. In great cities, the guild's influence stretched far. Royal courts consulted master guild cooks for banquets. Civic feasts relied on their coordination. Festival foods, roasted oxen, sugar sculptures, moulded jellies were the work of men and women trained through this system. The guild was also a safeguard against change. As trade routes shifted, ingredients arrived from abroad: rice, citrus, sugar, almonds. The guild debated how they could be used, who had access, what recipes were protected. Innovation was welcome, but not uncontrolled. And for the cook within the guild, there was pride, a sense of belonging to a craft that fed not just stomachs, but cities, a trade that required memory, hand, and heart, a vocation that could begin with peeling onions and end with designing dishes for bishops and barons. At the end of a long day, the cook would remove his apron, wash his hands, and perhaps, if the guild was meeting, join the others in the hall beneath the hanging banner beside the hearth, and share a quiet mug of ale, a small reward for a life of fire, steam, and constant preparation. Because in the medieval world, the cook was not a shadowy figure behind the curtain. He or she was a craftsman, a guild member, a bearer of taste, time, and tradition. Centuries pass. The cooks fall silent. The fires go out, the wooden shelves rot, the kitchens are abandoned first to dust, then to ruin, then to soil, and yet they speak, not in words, but in fragments, in cracked pots, scorched hearthstones, charred bones, and rusted blades. These are the remnants that survive when the recipes are lost, and the hands that stirred them are long gone. They are the language of kitchen archaeology. Let us descend now, gently, into the layers of time beneath an old manor, abbey, or town square. A team of archaeologists crouches in the soil, trowels and brushes in hand, each centimetre of earth removed with care, every object tagged and mapped. Here, beneath centuries of rubble, lies a kitchen. What remains is rarely grand. The great fireplaces have collapsed into rubble. The ceiling beams are long gone, but embedded in the soil are clues rich, dense, and telling. First, the bones. Piles of animal remains cluster near what would have been the refuse pit. Cow, pig, sheep, goose. The butcher's marks are still visible, clean slices from iron knives, evidence of joints removed and meat carved. Some bones are cracked open, likely for marrow. Others are scorched, blackened by roasting or boiling. Mixed among them, sometimes, are fish bones fine, delicate, and more elusive. The presence of cod or herring might suggest trade, especially in inland towns. Shells from oysters or mussels hint at feasting, or perhaps Lent meals. Rat bones appear too, an uninvited but ever-present guest in any storeroom. Then the ceramics. Cooking pots made of coarse, greyware clay, their undersides blackened by fire. Some are glazed, others plain. Their shape tells much. Their curvature, thickness, and lip design can date them within decades. A broken handle reveals how it was lifted from the fire. A soot ring shows how it was used. Among the shards, one might find bowls, jugs, and pipkins, small pots with legs, designed to sit directly among coals. There may be colanders or strainers, their holes worn smooth with repeated use. A piece of a green glazed serving dish suggests not just function, but presentation. Occasionally, fragments of glass from spice jars perhaps appear, rare but precious. Their very fragility is what makes their survival so striking. Next, the metal. Knives, long rusted. Iron skewers, bent or blunted. The base of a cauldron, its once shiny surface now dulled by centuries of damp. Iron spits, recovered from manor kitchens, speak of roasting on open flame. The occasional copper pan or ladle, found beneath a collapsed chimney. These tools were workhorses used daily, handled until they broke or were replaced. They rarely bore ornament, but their shape and size tell us what was cooked and how. And then, sometimes, the unexpected. Charred seeds or grains caught in hearth, cracks evidence of spilled pottage, or bread flour blown by a breeze. Traces of herbs, sometimes identifiable under the microscope. Pollen grains that suggest what was growing nearby. Even parasite eggs have been recovered from cesspits, proof of poor washing or contaminated meat. These grim details help reconstruct the health of the population, their habits, and the risks of their diet. At monastic sites, the kitchens often yield more regular refuse, bones neatly sorted, fewer signs of indulgence, more lentils, beans, fish. In noble manors, the remains are more extravagant, venison, swan, even imported spices suggested by pottery residues. Chemical analysis adds more layers. Residue testing can reveal the presence of fats, oils, and sugars. Was that pot used for milk, for meat stew, for honeyed wine? Traces linger in the pores of ceramics, preserved by time and accident. And then, the kitchen structures themselves. Hearths are often the centerpiece, massive, stone-lined, sometimes with the remains of andirons or cooking cranes. Chimneys, where they exist, mark advancement in kitchen design. Floors of packed earth, cobble or tile, show wear patterns where cooks stood, walked, turned. Drains and gutters speak to cleaning methods, or their absence. Midden heaps tell what was discarded and when. Sometimes, a kitchen was modified over time, a new wall built, a second oven added, a doorway sealed. Each change marks a shift in use, in needs, in technology. Most poignantly, archaeology sometimes finds the human touch, a child's footprint, fossilized in kitchen clay, a single spoon, carved with initials, a lost thimble, perhaps from a kitchen maid's apron. These are the quiet echoes of lives once lived around fire, food, and labor. And while no single artifact can tell a full story, together they whisper. Of meals cooked long ago, of hands blistered from stirring, of conversations beside the hearth, of laughter, argument, routine. The kitchen, it turns out, survives not in grand monuments, but in fragments, in what was dropped, discarded, broken, and in the silence of the trench, among the layers of ash and bone, we listen. And now, as the last embers of our journey flicker low, we find ourselves sitting quietly, perhaps on a worn wooden bench beside a long cold hearth, the scent of ash and old herbs lingering faintly in the air. For 2 hours, we have wandered through the forgotten kitchens of medieval Europe, not the romantic, candlelit halls of feasting kings, but the warm, smoky, soot-streaked world where real work was done. We have stood in the heat of castle cookhouses, walked beside street pie sellers, followed fishmongers in the misty dawn, and brushed the dust from centuries-old cooking pots buried beneath the earth. We have watched child apprentices slice roots by firelight, felt the exhaustion of hauling salted meat through muddy roads to hungry soldiers, listened to the silence of monastic meals, imagined the patient stirring of barley in a cauldron at the edge of a battlefield, and perhaps, as the hours passed, you noticed something else. That this history so ordinary, so repetitive, so grounded in necessity has a rhythm of chopping and stirring, of boiling and baking, of rising before dawn and working past dusk, a rhythm that, in its constancy, becomes oddly soothing. There is comfort in knowing that centuries ago, someone stood where you stand in front of a hearth or a table or a pot, wondering if there was enough salt, if the bread would rise, if dinner would be ready in time. That even in a world without electricity, refrigerators, or timers, people fed one another with care, with effort, with knowledge handed down through smoke and time. The medieval kitchen was a world of labor, but also of life. And while the tools have changed and the recipes evolved, the essence remains. A kitchen, no matter the century, is a place where time slows, where hands work, where the air is thick with smells and memories, where comfort is made, one simple meal at a time. So now, dear listener, as your own breath slows and the images fade gently from your mind, let yourself rest. The knives have been cleaned, the bread has been baked, the fire has gone out. The kitchen is quiet now, and you can sleep.